My mother looked me dead in the eye on Thanksgiving evening and told me there was simply no room for my 8-year-old daughter at her dinner table. Through the doorway, I could clearly see my sister Chloe's son happily digging into a massive plate of baked macaroni and cheese. My little girl stood right beside me, holding a sweet potato pie she had baked from scratch just for this night. No one inside the warm house argued. No one even looked up to defend us. My daughter quietly carried the pie back to my car. I did not scream or cry. I just smiled, said absolutely nothing, and drove home. That night, I made a single post online that my entire family was not prepared for, and by the next morning, their perfect world completely collapsed. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in my family meant that the outward image was absolutely everything. My mother Brenda cared more about what the neighbors thought than how her own children felt. I was always the quiet child, the darker-skinned daughter who preferred reading financial reports to taking pictures. From the time I was in elementary school, I maintained straight A's, joined academic clubs, and earned a full scholarship to college. But those achievements were never enough to catch my mother's eye. She preferred flashy things, sparkling dresses, and fake smiles at parties. When I started working in the cutthroat financial industry, I chose to live quietly, save my money, and invest everything I earned into real estate funds. My family, with their narrow vision, always assumed that because I did not wear designer clothes with massive logos or drive a flashy car, I was just a struggling office worker barely scraping by. I never bothered to correct them, because my peace of mind was worth much more than their validation. The crisp November air bit at our cheeks as Zuri and I walked up the long concrete driveway to the massive red brick house. I had spent hours that morning helping Zuri measure every ingredient and roll out the dough for her pie. Zuri was buzzing with pure excitement, her small hands carefully gripping the warm aluminum tin. She reached up and adjusted the tiny pink hearing aid tucked neatly behind her left ear. My family always treated her hearing aid like some sort of massive aesthetic inconvenience rather than a necessary medical device. When we reached the front steps, I knocked twice and pushed the heavy oak door open, hoping to be welcomed by the familiar warmth of a holiday gathering. Instead, my mother stepped directly into the threshold, completely blocking our path. She was wearing her most expensive pearl necklace and a tight, forced smile that did not hide the coldness in her eyes. "Maya, you made it," she said, her voice overly bright, but completely hollow. I looked past her shoulder into the glowing house. It smelled incredibly rich, like roasted turkey, stewed collard greens, and candied yams. The long dining table in the living room was perfectly set with gold-rimmed plates and sparkling crystal glasses. Yet my mother did not move a single inch to let us step inside. "I am so sorry, Maya, but there just is not enough room this year," she said, crossing her arms firmly over her chest. "The table is completely full." I blinked, trying to process the sheer audacity of her words. Right behind my mother, I could see my 29-year-old sister Chloe pacing around the living room. She was holding a bright ring light and speaking loudly into her phone camera. Chloe was the perfect golden child of the family. She was a lifestyle influencer and spent all her days flaunting a flawless image of Black excellence and perfect family values to her 1 million followers. She built her entire brand on playing the perfect mother and wife. Chloe glanced toward the front door, rolled her heavily made-up eyes, and shouted over her shoulder, "Mom, tell Maya to keep it down. Zuri is too loud, and I am trying to film the holiday vibe for my channel right now. She does not fit the frame at all." My blood ran completely cold, but I kept my face entirely neutral. Zuri was the sweetest and most well-behaved little girl in the world. The only thing loud about her was the joyful way she laughed. But to my sister, my daughter was just a defective prop that ruined her perfectly curated internet life. Just then, a loud, booming voice echoed from the head of the dining table. It was Brad, my 34-year-old white brother-in-law. He was leaning back in a heavy mahogany chair, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Brad always acted like he understood our culture better than we did ourselves. He talked over me at every single opportunity and treated me like the family failure just because I wore simple clothes. He let out a loud, condescending chuckle and smirked directly at me. "House is packed, sis," he called out, then took a slow, arrogant sip of his drink. "You really should know better. Next time remember to call ahead before you just show up expecting to eat our food." I looked down at the beautiful little pie in my daughter's hands. Then I looked straight at Brad, the man sitting comfortably in a house. He did not pay a single dime for drinking expensive liquor. He definitely did not buy himself, and acting like the absolute king of a castle he had no legal right to claim. My mother just stood there nodding in complete agreement with him. "Well, you heard them, Maya," my mother said softly, leaning a little closer to my face. "We really cannot accommodate you two tonight. Have a nice evening." She actually reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle, and pulled the thick wooden door shut right in our faces. That blatant disrespect was not just a simple insult, it was a complete character assassination of both me and my little girl. I could physically feel Zuri shrink beside me. Her small shoulders slumped in absolute defeat, and she stared down at her shoes. Any other woman might have lost her mind right there on the front porch. I could have screamed. I could have forced my way inside and demanded the respect I rightfully deserved. I could have reminded my mother and that arrogant brother-in-law exactly who they were dealing with. But I knew much better than that. Toxic people feed entirely on your emotional reactions. They desperately want to see you act crazy so they can play the victim and label you as bitter. I looked at my mother's smug face, then at Brad's victorious grin across the room, and finally at Chloe, who was still completely ignoring us to stare at her phone screen. I did not give them a single tear. I did not raise my voice by a single decibel. I simply placed a gentle hand on Zuri's shoulder and gave my mother a devastatingly calm smile. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said in a smooth, even tone. "There really is not enough room here for us. Enjoy your dinner." I turned around, took my daughter's tiny hand, and walked away from the porch. I heard the heavy front door click shut behind us, locking us out in the freezing night. Zuri was incredibly quiet the entire walk back to my car. She carefully placed her sweet potato pie in the back seat and buckled her seatbelt without saying a single word. The yellow streetlights cast long, sad shadows across her face as we drove away. "Mom, is it because I cannot hear well like Cousin Mason that Grandma does not like me?" Zuri whispered, breaking the heavy silence. That innocent question felt like a sharp knife slicing straight through my heart. "No, my sweet girl." I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice as steady as possible. Sometimes the people with the best hearing are the ones who are completely deaf and blind to real love. "Your pie is absolutely amazing, and tonight we are going to have a very special feast just for the two of us." They thought they had won a massive victory. They thought they had successfully humiliated the quiet older sister who never fought back. What my mother, my sister, and that arrogant brother-in-law did not realize was that their cheap power play had just activated a catastrophic consequence they could never possibly afford. They had just locked the actual legal owner of that red brick house out in the cold. I shifted the car into gear and sped off into the silent night, completely ready to burn their fake, glamorous lives straight to the ground. The heater inside my car hummed softly, pushing warm air against the freezing November chill, but the atmosphere in the front seat remained incredibly heavy. I kept my eyes fixed on the red taillights of the cars ahead of us, navigating the dark suburban streets. In the passenger seat, my sweet 8-year-old daughter sat clutching the warm aluminum tin on her lap. Her small fingers traced the crimped edges of the foil. "Mom, does Grandma not like my pie?" she asked. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and it carried a weight no child should ever have to bear. I gripped the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned completely white. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain perfectly steady and light. "Oh, honey, your pie is absolutely perfect," I told her. "Grandma is just missing out on the best dessert in the city. That just means there is more for us, right?" Zuri managed a small, hesitant smile, but I could see the profound hurt still lingering in her dark eyes. She reached up and lightly touched the pink hearing aid behind her ear. It was a subconscious habit she had developed whenever my family made her feel less than adequate. For years, I had watched my mother Brenda and my sister Chloe shower my nephew Mason with endless affection, expensive gifts, and loud praises. Mason was Chloe's son, the perfect, able-bodied golden child who fit flawlessly into their pristine internet aesthetic. Whenever Zuri entered a room, my mother would dramatically lower her voice, as if my daughter was entirely deaf and incapable of understanding basic English. Chloe would intentionally exclude Zuri from family photos, claiming the hearing aid clashed with her carefully chosen color palettes. They treated my brilliant, empathetic child like a burden simply because she required a little extra patience. They marginalized her at every single turn, and tonight was the absolute breaking point. We drove away from the suffocating suburbs and headed straight toward the glittering downtown skyline. My family always assumed I lived in some cramped, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city because I refused to host them and never showed off designer labels. They equated my silence with struggle and my simplicity with poverty. They had absolutely no idea who I really was. I pulled my car into the private underground parking garage of the most exclusive residential high-rise in the city. The uniformed valet greeted me warmly by name as I helped Zuri out of the car. We rode the private glass elevator all the way to the top floor. When the polished steel doors slid open, we stepped directly into my actual home, a sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the sparkling city below. The space was decorated with original artwork, custom furniture, and sleek modern finishes. It was a fortress of tranquility and wealth that I had built entirely on my own. I helped Zuri out of her coat, and we walked straight to the massive marble kitchen island. I grabbed 2 silver forks, and we stood right there, eating the sweet potato pie straight from the tin. It was warm, sweet, and absolutely delicious. Zuri giggled as a piece of crust crumbled onto the counter, and in that beautiful moment, the toxic sting of my family's rejection completely melted away from her face. I tucked her into her plush canopy bed, kissed her forehead, and promised her that tomorrow we would have the biggest and best Thanksgiving feast, just the two of us. Once Zuri was fast asleep, I walked over to my custom-built home bar. I selected a bottle of vintage dark red wine, uncorked it, and poured a generous glass. The rich ruby liquid swirled against the crystal as I walked over to my home office. I sat down in my leather executive chair and opened my sleek laptop. The bright screen illuminated my face in the darkened room. It was time to pull the trigger. I logged into my secure financial portal, navigating through multiple layers of encrypted security. My family thought I was just a mid-level data entry clerk. The truth was, I was the director of a highly successful private equity firm. I managed corporate portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But my most interesting investments were the ones my family knew absolutely nothing about. 5 years ago, my mother was secretly on the verge of total bankruptcy. Her obsession with maintaining a wealthy appearance had completely drained her bank accounts. Her beloved red brick house was actively facing foreclosure. Instead of letting her lose everything, I stepped in quietly. I created an anonymous, limited liability company and purchased the house directly from the bank. I paid off all the outstanding debts and allowed her to continue living there under the guise of a generous private landlord who never raised the rent. My mother literally lived in a house that I legally owned. She slept under a roof that I paid for every single month. And then there was my sister Chloe. 3 years ago, when she wanted to launch her lifestyle brand and beauty line, she was desperately looking for investors. No legitimate bank would approve her business plan because it was entirely based on vanity metrics and completely lacked a solid financial structure. So I used a subsidiary investment branch of my firm to act as her anonymous angel investor. My company provided the massive seed funding that launched her entire brand. We legally owned 80% of her business. The designer clothes she flaunted, the luxury cars she leased for her videos, and the expensive camera equipment she used to record her perfect life were all funded by the equity firm that I controlled. They thought they were self-made royalty. In reality, they were just expensive dependents living entirely on my payroll. I took a slow sip of the dark wine, letting the bold flavor settle on my tongue. I opened a new tab and accessed the security system for the red brick house. Since I was the legal property owner, the entire smart home security network was registered directly to my private email address. I clicked on the front door camera feed and quickly found the recorded footage from earlier that evening. The video was perfectly clear. It captured high-definition audio and video of my mother blocking the door, Chloe complaining about Zuri ruining her aesthetic, and Brad arrogantly telling me to call ahead before trying to eat their food. I downloaded the video file straight to my desktop. Next, I drafted two formal legal documents. The first was an official 30-day eviction notice for the red brick house, citing a complete termination of the month-to-month tenancy agreement. The second was a corporate memorandum from my investment firm officially notifying Chloe's company that we were immediately freezing all operational funding and exercising our right to liquidate our 80% ownership stake due to breach of conduct clauses. I saved both documents as clear, high-resolution images. Then I opened my social media accounts. I did not write a long emotional paragraph. I did not complain or play the victim. I simply uploaded the security camera video of us being turned away in the cold. Right after the video, I attached the images of the eviction notice and the corporate funding withdrawal. For the caption, I kept it razor sharp. Thanksgiving is a time to be grateful for the roof over your head and the food on your table. Since my family does not have room for my daughter and me at their dinner table, I am making sure they have plenty of room to pack their bags. Eviction notice served, funding cut. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone who truly knows the meaning of family. I tagged Chloe's verified influencer account directly in the post. I tagged the major brands that sponsored her. I tagged my arrogant brother-in-law. I made the post completely public. I did not hesitate for a single second. I moved my cursor over the screen and confidently clicked the publish button. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my leather chair, and took another sip of wine. The trap was set, the bait was dropped, and the absolute destruction of their fake empire was completely inevitable. I looked out the massive windows at the glowing city lights, feeling an incredible sense of peace. Tomorrow morning, the internet was going to wake up, and my family was going to realize that the quiet sister they had bullied their entire lives was actually the person holding the matches to their paper castle. The morning sun had barely crested the city skyline when the digital avalanche began. My smartphone screen looked like a flashing strobe light sitting on the polished marble island of my kitchen. Ping, ping, ping. The notification chimes were overlapping so rapidly they blurred into one continuous high-pitched ring. I stood barefoot on the heated floor, wearing a plush silk robe, completely unbothered by the chaos erupting inside that little metal device. I leaned over my state-of-the-art espresso machine, inhaling the rich, earthy aroma of freshly ground dark roast coffee. I slowly poured the steaming liquid into my favorite ceramic mug, added a splash of oat milk, and took a long, peaceful sip. The coffee had never tasted so incredibly sweet. I finally picked up my phone and unlocked the screen. The numbers staring back at me were absolutely staggering. In less than 8 hours, my single social media post had garnered over 2 million views. Black Twitter had completely taken over the narrative, and they were absolutely merciless. The internet detectives had worked relentlessly through the night, dissecting every single frame of my security camera footage. The sharp contrast between my sister Chloe's heavily filtered Thanksgiving aesthetic and the cruel reality of her turning a deaf child away at the door was an absolute public relations nightmare. Chloe had posted a glossy, perfectly staged family photo at the dining room table right around midnight. Her caption read, "Thankful for my beautiful family and the endless blessings we share." But my video had been posted just an hour before her picture went live. People were aggressively flooding her comment section with screenshots of my eviction notice and the corporate funding withdrawal document. They were calling out her massive hypocrisy in real time. One viral post with 50,000 retweets read, "So you pretend to be a self-made millionaire boss babe, but your quiet older sister literally owns the roof over your head and the camera you film with." The collective internet was fiercely protecting Zuri. They were rightfully outraged that a brilliant, sweet child with a hearing impairment was treated like an inconvenient prop just because she did not fit a carefully curated online aesthetic. The financial consequences for my sister were instantaneous and brutal. Chloe's carefully constructed empire was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Three major luxury beauty brands that sponsored her channel had already released official public statements on their corporate pages. They announced they were immediately severing all ties and permanently suspending all active campaigns with Chloe's touch, citing a strict zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and ableism. She was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in lucrative brand deals before she even had a chance to drink her morning coffee. Suddenly, the endless flood of social media notifications was interrupted by an incoming call. The caller ID flashed with my mother's name. I let the phone ring 3 times, taking another leisurely sip of my espresso, enjoying the view of the city below. Finally, I pressed the green accept button and placed the phone on the marble counter, putting the call on speakerphone. The background noise on the other end of the line was absolute, pure, unadulterated chaos. I could hear my mother Brenda sobbing hysterically in the distance, loudly wailing about her ruined reputation and what the wealthy neighbors were going to think. I could hear Chloe hyperventilating, screaming at an assistant to call her crisis publicist immediately. But the person who actually spoke into the receiver was Brad. "Maya, what the hell is wrong with you?" Brad barked. His voice was thick with unearned authority and dripping with the absolute condescension of a white man who firmly believed he was the smartest and most powerful person in any room. "You are acting completely unhinged. You need to take that post down right this exact second. You are ruining my wife's sponsorships and you are terrorizing your own mother." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single emotional reaction to feed his incredibly fragile ego. I just stood in my multi-million-dollar kitchen, looking out over the sprawling city that my investments helped build, and I laughed. It was not a bitter laugh or an angry scoff. It was a genuine, deeply amused chuckle that bubbled up from my chest. The sheer audacity of this man trying to command me was almost comical. "You think I am terrorizing you, Brad?" I asked, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "You all looked pretty comfortable drinking my expensive liquor in my house last night while my daughter stood outside in the freezing cold." "Do not play games with me, Maya," Brad snapped loudly, attempting to dominate the conversation by simply raising his volume. "I am not playing around with you. Chloe is losing real money every single minute that fake video is up. You are going to delete the post, you are going to call these makeup brands and say your account was hacked, and then you are going to publicly apologize to this family. If you do not do exactly what I say right now, I am going to call my lawyers and sue you for every single penny you have. We are going to take that little apartment of yours and leave you with absolutely nothing. Do you understand me?" His blind arrogance was truly something to behold. He was actively trying to put the quiet black woman in her place using legal threats he could not even begin to afford. He still thought I was a struggling administrative assistant. He still thought he held the upper hand. I took one more slow sip of my coffee, letting the heavy silence stretch out over the phone line, just long enough to make him incredibly uncomfortable. "Brad," I said softly, cutting through his heavy breathing, I strongly suggest you stop yelling at the woman who literally pays for the high-speed internet connection you are currently using to make this phone call. My post was not a threat, and it was definitely not fake. It was a formal legal notification. I am not deleting a single thing, and my corporate legal team is already miles ahead of whatever bargain bin lawyer you think you can hire. He sputtered loudly, trying to interrupt me, but I cut through his noise like a hot knife through butter. Do me a huge favor, Brad, I continued, my tone dropping to an icy, commanding whisper. Instead of screaming at me over the phone trying to act tough, why do not you go walk down the hall and open the bottom drawer of my mother's desk in the home office? Take a good hard look at the original property deeds. Read the name of the holding company that legally owns the house you are currently standing in. Then go check the corporate financial registration for Chloe's precious beauty brand. When you finally realize that I own absolutely everything you touch, you can start packing your bags. You have exactly 29 days left. I did not wait for his response. I did not need to hear him stammer or aggressively backpedal. I reached down and tapped the red button, ending the call instantly. Without a second thought, I went into my phone settings and blocked my mother's number. Then I blocked Chloe's number. Then I completely blocked Brad's number. I blocked their email addresses and their social media accounts. I systematically severed every single line of communication, ensuring they were entirely cut off from the person who controlled their entire livelihood. The kitchen was perfectly quiet again. The crisp morning light poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapping the sleek room in a warm golden glow. Down the hallway, I could hear the soft sound of Zuri's bedroom door opening. She padded slowly into the kitchen, wearing her fluffy pink pajamas, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She looked up at me with a bright, innocent smile, completely untouched by the absolute digital warfare happening across the city. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice sweet and musical as she climbed onto one of the tall bar stools. "Are we still having our special Thanksgiving feast today?" I smiled down at my beautiful daughter, feeling an overwhelming wave of fierce, protective love wash over me. "Yes, my sweet girl," I told her, walking over and pulling her into a warm, tight hug. "We are going to have the absolute best feast ever. And we never have to worry about anyone telling us there is not enough room at the table ever again." I left the kitchen feeling completely rejuvenated and walked into my expansive master suite to get dressed for the day. I slipped into a tailored charcoal pantsuit and a pair of sleek black stilettos. The sharp, rhythmic click of my heels echoed against the polished hardwood floors as I began pacing along the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my home office. The morning sun was climbing higher over the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across my heavy mahogany desk. I was just about to review my daily investment portfolios when a high-priority notification flashed across my laptop screen. The email was from Brad. The subject line was written in all capital letters reading, "Cease and desist, immediate legal action pending." I did not roll my eyes or sigh. I simply leaned over the desk, rested my hands on the cool wood, and began to read the absolute masterpiece of delusion he had just sent me. "Maya, you have officially crossed a line that you cannot come back from," the email began. "My legal team is currently drafting a massive defamation lawsuit against you. You are going to pay for every single dollar Chloe lost this morning. But do not think for one second that your petty little financial stunt actually destroyed us. In fact, you just did us a massive favor. Because while you were busy playing your pathetic revenge games, a major anonymous investor just reached out to our corporate team. They are injecting massive capital into Chloe's Touch by the end of the week. We do not need your pathetic pennies anymore. You are completely irrelevant." I paused my reading and let out a soft breath of pure amusement. A major anonymous investor. Brad was so incredibly blinded by his own arrogance that he did not even realize how the world of high-level venture capital actually worked. He genuinely believed some magical billionaire had swooped in from the sky to save his wife's failing beauty brand just because she had a pretty face and a million fake followers. But the email did not stop there. Brad could never just keep things professional. He had to dig deep into the toxic family dynamics that had festered in our house for decades. He had to remind me exactly how they all viewed me. "We all know exactly why you did this, Maya." He wrote his words dripping with venom. "You have been insanely jealous of Chloe since you were both children. You have always been completely bitter that she is the lighter-skinned, prettier sister. You hate that she has the perfect hair, the perfect body, and the perfect life. You hate that she married a successful white man who actually takes care of her while you sit alone in your empty apartment with nothing but your boring college degrees. You chose to hide behind books and academic clubs because you knew you could never compete with her in the real world. You are a sad, lonely, dark-skinned spinster who is trying to ruin her sister's happiness out of pure spite. My wife is a star, and you are nothing but a jealous shadow. We will see you in court." I stood up straight and slowly walked back over to the expansive glass windows, looking down at the busy city streets far below. The sheer level of classism and colorism packed into that single email was staggering, but it was absolutely nothing new. Brad was simply echoing the exact same toxic rhetoric my mother had heavily promoted my entire life. Growing up in our household, proximity to whiteness was treated as the ultimate currency. My mother, Brenda, used to spend hours brushing Chloe's hair, telling her how lucky she was to have such a fair complexion. Chloe was paraded around like a prize pony, while I was constantly told to stay out of the sun so I would not get any darker. When I brought home straight-A report cards and college acceptance letters, my mother would barely glance at them before returning her attention to whatever beauty pageant or modeling casting Chloe was preparing for. They viewed my academic path as a pathetic consolation prize. To them, my quiet dedication to finance and real estate was just a coping mechanism because I could not secure a wealthy husband to take care of me. When Chloe married Brad, my family practically threw a parade. Brad was not even wealthy. He was a mid-level marketing manager with a massive ego and a mountain of credit card debt. But in my mother's deeply colonized mindset, Brad's whiteness automatically elevated our family status. He was treated like royalty. He was allowed to sit at the head of the table, disrespect the culture he married into, and talk down to me like I was the hired help. They genuinely believed that my dark skin and my quiet demeanor made me weak. They thought I was sitting in some tiny apartment, bitterly counting pennies and obsessing over their social media posts. They were so incredibly consumed by the superficial surface of life that they never bothered to look at who was actually pulling the strings beneath the floorboards. I walked back to my desk and opened my secondary secure server. I typed in my master password and accessed the private communication logs for my subsidiary investment firms. I wanted to see exactly who this major anonymous investor was that Brad was so arrogantly bragging about. It took me less than 30 seconds to find the answer. A holding company named Apex Vanguard had indeed sent an automated preliminary letter of interest to Chloe's Touch early that morning, right after the major sponsors had pulled out. Apex Vanguard was known for buying out distressed brands at rock-bottom prices. I stared at the name on the screen, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. Apex Vanguard was a shell company, and I was the sole majority shareholder of Apex Vanguard. Brad was currently celebrating a financial lifeline that I had completely automated. He was aggressively threatening to sue me, using the promise of money that was literally sitting in my own bank account. He was bragging about an investor that was actually me, just wearing a different corporate mask. The absolute utter stupidity of this man was almost too delicious to comprehend. He thought his whiteness and his loud voice gave him absolute power. He thought he could intimidate me with a few angry words typed on a keyboard. He did not realize he was playing a game of chess against the person who owned the entire board. I did not reply to his email. Replying would give him the validation he so desperately craved. It would let him know that his racist insults had successfully landed on my desk. Instead, I highlighted his entire message, downloaded a certified copy of the email headers to prove its origin, and forwarded it directly to my personal corporate attorney with a single sentence attached. Add this to the harassment file and prepare the final strike. I closed my laptop and adjusted the cuffs of my tailored suit. Let Brad think he had the upper hand. Let Chloe believe her anonymous savior was coming to rescue her failing empire. Let them both sleep soundly tonight, wrapped in their delusions of grandeur and superiority. Because when the time came to sign that new investment contract, they were going to be in for the most devastating shock of their miserable lives. I poured myself a fresh glass of sparkling water and took a long, refreshing sip. My phone was still completely silent since I had blocked all of their numbers. The penthouse was peaceful. My daughter was happy. And my trap was now perfectly double-bolted. I turned away from the window, ready to head into my actual office downtown. But before I could even grab my designer trench coat, the intercom system on my wall buzzed loudly. My private concierge from the ground floor lobby was calling up to my suite. I walked over and pressed the silver button. "Good morning, Ms. Maya," the concierge said, his voice tight with professional concern. "I am so sorry to disturb you, but there is a woman down here demanding to see you. She is causing quite a scene in the lobby. She claims she is your mother and she refuses to leave until you come down and face her." I took a slow, deep breath and pressed the silver button on the intercom to reply to the lobby concierge. "Please send her directly up to my floor." I said, my voice perfectly even and entirely devoid of emotion. I do not want her screaming in the public lobby where the other residents can hear her. Send her to the private penthouse elevator and make sure security is on standby just in case. I released the intercom button and walked back into my home office. I did not feel any panic or anxiety. My heart was beating at a steady, calm rhythm. I opened the top drawer of my heavy mahogany desk and pulled out the crisp white document I had printed late last night. It was the official 30-day notice to vacate. I carefully slipped the thick legal paper into a sleek black presentation folder. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit and walked out into my massive marble foyer to wait for my mother. A few moments later, a soft chime echoed through the high ceilings of my apartment. The heavy polished steel doors of the private elevator slid open. I stood exactly in the center of the doorway, looking down at her. From my vantage point, standing tall in my sharp suit and black stilettos, the entire visual dynamic of our relationship was permanently shifted. I was completely in control. My mother Brenda stepped out of the elevator, completely ready to scream, but the words instantly died in her throat. She froze in her tracks. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers as she took in the sheer magnitude of the space I was standing in. She looked at the imported marble floors, the sparkling crystal chandelier hanging above us, and the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the entire Atlanta skyline. She had driven all the way here expecting to find me in some cramped, miserable little studio apartment. Instead, she was standing in the foyer of a multi-million-dollar penthouse that made her own house look like a cheap storage unit. For a brief second, I saw genuine shock and confusion wash over her face. She looked at my expensive suit and then down at her own outfit. But my mother was deeply incapable of experiencing humility. Instead of asking questions or trying to understand, she instantly converted her shock into absolute rage. She gripped the handles of her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She marched right up to my doorstep and immediately began to project her own toxic insecurities all over me. "Have you completely lost your mind, Maya?" she screamed, her voice echoing harshly against my pristine walls. "You think just because you somehow swindled your way into a nice apartment, you can treat your family like absolute trash? You need to delete that fake post right now. You are ruining your sister." I did not say a single word. I just stood there looking at her with an expression of mild boredom. My absolute silence only infuriated her more. She started waving her hands frantically, pacing back and forth in front of my door. "I know exactly what you are doing," Brenda continued, her voice growing shriller with every single word. "You are completely sick with jealousy. You have been insanely jealous of Chloe since the day she was born. You hate the fact that she has lighter skin and beautiful hair. You hate the fact that she is gorgeous and popular and actually built a successful life for herself while you sit around entirely alone. You are just a bitter, dark-skinned woman who cannot stand the fact that your sister managed to marry a wonderful, wealthy white man who actually takes care of her. Brad is a brilliant provider, and you are just trying to tear their beautiful marriage apart because nobody has ever loved you enough to put a ring on your finger. The sheer level of delusion pouring out of her mouth was absolutely staggering. She was standing in a piece of real estate worth more than her entire life savings lecturing me about success. She was praising a man who was actively draining her favorite daughter dry, and she was weaponizing my skin color just like she had done since I was a little girl. You are completely unhinged, Maya, she yelled, stepping closer to me and pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. You are abusive and you are crazy. You forged those documents online just to humiliate us. I demand that you get on the internet right now, tell everyone you are having a mental breakdown, and apologize to Chloe and Brad. If you do not fix this mess, you are no longer a daughter of mine. Do you hear me? You will be completely dead to me. She stood there, chest heaving, breathing heavily, waiting for me to react. She wanted me to break down and cry. She wanted me to scream back so she could call me an angry, bitter woman. She desperately needed me to beg for her approval, just like I used to do when I was a child. But that little girl was long gone. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, and I felt absolutely nothing but deep pity. She was a hollow, empty shell of a person who valued the opinions of strangers on the internet more than the heart of her own flesh and blood. She would rather protect a racist, arrogant son-in-law than defend her own disabled granddaughter. Are you quite finished? I asked softly. My mother blinked, completely thrown off guard by my incredibly calm tone. You are a monster, she hissed. No, mother. I am the landlord, I replied smoothly. I stepped forward and extended my right hand, holding out the sleek black presentation folder. My mother looked at it with deep suspicion before slowly taking it from my grasp. She flipped the dark cover open and stared down at the crisp legal document inside. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the page as she read the bold black letters at the top of the paper. Notice to vacate the premises. I watched the exact moment her brain finally connected all the dots. I watched the arrogant fire completely drain out of her eyes, replaced instantly by a cold, creeping horror. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, completely entirely speechless. She realized that the fake documents she had been screaming about were entirely real. She realized that the quiet daughter she had bullied for decades was the anonymous owner she had been paying rent to for the last 5 years. I am giving you exactly 30 days to vacate my property, I said, my voice carrying the absolute finality of a judge delivering a sentence. You will remove all of your belongings and leave the keys on the kitchen counter by the 1st of next month. If you leave a single scratch on the hardwood floors, I will keep your security deposit and I will bill you for the repairs. Maya. Please. My mother stuttered, her voice suddenly trembling as the terrifying reality of her situation crashed down on her shoulders. You cannot be serious. This is my home. Where am I supposed to go? I looked her dead in the eye, completely unbothered by her sudden, pathetic attempt to play the victim. I hope Chloe's love can put a roof over your head, I told her. Have a happy Thanksgiving, Mother. Before she could utter another single syllable, I stepped back inside my beautiful penthouse and pulled the heavy oak door completely shut. The lock clicked into place with a loud, satisfying thud. I turned my back to the door and walked slowly toward the kitchen, pouring myself a fresh glass of sparkling water. I could hear her muffled, frantic pounding on the heavy wood from the other side of the door. I could hear her begging and crying, calling my name over and over again. But her voice was completely muffled by the thick, expensive soundproofing of my front door. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the bright morning sun warming the city. The toxic weight I had been carrying around my entire life was completely gone. The heavy chains of family obligation had been permanently shattered. My mother had driven to my home hoping to manipulate and gaslight me into submission, but she had walked away entirely homeless. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my water, enjoying the absolute profound silence of my sanctuary, knowing that the real war was just beginning to unfold. The afternoon sun began to dip below the city skyline, casting long amber shadows across my penthouse living room. I sat perfectly still on the center cushion of my white curved sofa, resting my sleek silver iPad on my crossed legs. The space around me was completely silent save for the soft hum of the climate control system, but the digital world inside my screen was absolutely exploding. I swiped my finger slowly across the smooth glass, my face completely devoid of any emotion, while the internet tore my name to absolute shreds. Chloe had gone live on Instagram. She had abandoned her usual flawless high fashion aesthetic for a carefully calculated look of deep vulnerability. She wore a plain, oversized gray sweater, her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her makeup was done perfectly to look like she had been crying for hours. Over 300,000 people were watching her broadcast in real time. She sat on the floor of her perfectly decorated bedroom, clutching a tissue and staring into the camera with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I am so sorry to come on here like this, guys." Chloe sniffled, her voice trembling with an expertly rehearsed crack. "I wanted to keep my family issues private, but my older sister Maya has forced my hand. Everything she posted this morning is a complete lie. She is trying to destroy my life and leave my poor mother completely homeless just because she has always hated me." I watched the little heart icons flutter up the side of the screen as her followers flooded the chat with messages of sympathy and outrage. Chloe wiped a single perfectly timed tear from her cheek and launched into the most despicable fabricated story I had ever heard. "5 years ago, my mother was incredibly sick," Chloe explained, looking directly into the lens. "She was battling severe health issues and was heavily medicated. Maya knew our mother was completely vulnerable and not in her right mind. She brought over a stack of legal documents disguised as medical insurance forms and tricked my mother into signing over the deed to our family home. Maya practically stole the house out from under us while my mother was fighting for her life." The sheer audacity of the lie was almost impressive. 5 years ago, my mother was not sick at all. She was going on expensive luxury cruises with her friends while actively defaulting on her mortgage. But the internet did not know that. The internet loves a tragic victim, and Chloe was giving them an absolute masterclass in manipulation. "She has always been deeply jealous of me," Chloe continued, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "She hated that I found success online. She hated that I married Brad. She has been financially abusing our mother for years, holding that fake house deed over her head and demanding control. And when Brad finally stood up to her last night to protect our family, she decided to retaliate by trying to illegally freeze my company assets and evict our mother on Thanksgiving weekend. She is a sick, bitter person, and I am terrified of what she might do next." The comment section was moving so incredibly fast, it was a blur of angry text. People were calling me a monster, a sociopath, and a criminal. Major gossip blogs were already screen recording the live stream and posting it to their own pages with sensationalized headlines. Fans who had been praising me just hours earlier were now violently turning against me. The hashtag Cancel Maya was already starting to trend on Twitter. Chloe's followers were demanding that the police investigate me for elder abuse and fraud. They were tagging the local authorities and leaving thousands of hateful comments on my business pages. Brad even made a brief cameo in the video, walking into the frame to gently wrap his arms around Chloe, kissing the top of her head and looking solemnly into the camera. "We are handling this legally," Brad said, using his deep, authoritative voice to add a layer of white male credibility to her massive web of lies. "We will not let this toxic woman tear our family apart. Thank you all for supporting my beautiful wife." I watched the broadcast for exactly 12 minutes before I calmly pressed the home button and closed the application. The screen went black, reflecting my entirely unbothered expression. Any other person would be hyperventilating in a cold sweat. Any normal professional would be immediately calling a crisis management firm to draft a desperate public statement. The urge to jump online and defend your name when thousands of strangers are attacking your character is a very natural human instinct. But I was not playing a game of internet optics. I did not care what teenagers on social media thought about my character. Chloe and Brad were desperately fighting a public relations war because public perception was the only currency they actually possessed. They needed the internet to believe their lies because their entire income relied entirely on being liked. I relied entirely on cold hard facts and legally binding contracts. I did not need to convince the internet of anything because the internet did not hold the deed to the red brick house. The internet did not own 80% of Chloe's company. I did. I picked up my cell phone from the glass coffee table. I did not open social media. I did not record a rebuttal video. Instead, I dialed the direct private extension of my corporate financial auditing team. The call rang exactly one time before the lead auditor answered. "Good afternoon, Miss Maya," he said, his tone entirely professional and sharp. "We saw the notice you pushed through the system regarding the accounts this morning. All operational funding has been completely frozen across the board. How would you like us to proceed?" I stood up from the sofa and walked over to my kitchen island, pouring myself a fresh cup of dark coffee. I want a complete forensic audit of every single dollar that has moved through that company in the last 36 months. I instructed, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. I want you to pull every bank statement, every credit card receipt, every wire transfer, and every single expense report. I do not care how small the transaction is. Dig into the vendor accounts, the travel expenses, and the payroll distributions. "Understood, Ms. Maya," the auditor replied. "Are we looking for anything specific?" I took a slow sip of my hot coffee, looking down at the bustling city traffic far below my window. "Brad is the chief financial officer of her brand," I said softly. "He has had unrestricted access to the corporate accounts for 3 years. A man with his level of arrogance and deep-seated insecurities does not just sit around happily managing his wife's money without taking a massive cut for himself. Men like Brad always think they are smarter than the system. They always leave a trail. Find the trail. Find every single unauthorized dime he has spent. I want the preliminary report on my desk first thing Monday morning. Consider it done." "Ms. Maya, we will put our best analysts on it immediately," the auditor said before respectfully ending the call. I placed my phone back down on the cold marble counter. Let Chloe cry on the internet. Let her manipulate her followers into believing she was a helpless victim of a cruel older sister. Let Brad puff out his chest and pretend to be the strong, protective husband defending his fragile wife. They were completely wasting their energy trying to control a narrative that had absolutely no bearing on the actual reality of their situation. They thought they were winning because a few thousand strangers were typing angry comments on a screen. But while they were busy playing dress-up and performing for the cameras, I was systematically dismantling the very foundation their entire lives were built upon. The smear campaign was just a desperate distraction. It was the loud, frantic thrashing of an animal caught completely in a trap. I turned my back on the iPad, leaving the chaotic digital world completely behind me. Zuri was in the next room, happily watching a movie, and the smell of our private Thanksgiving dinner was already starting to fill the penthouse. My mind was perfectly clear and my strategy was flawlessly executed. Monday morning was going to bring a level of absolute devastation they could not even begin to fathom. And no amount of fake tears or Instagram live streams would ever be able to save them from the brutal financial truth. My manicured nails tapped a rapid rhythmic sequence across the sleek keyboard of my laptop. I sat comfortably at my heavy mahogany desk, looking directly at the master banking portal for my investment firm. With a few decisive keystrokes, I bypassed the standard employee interfaces and accessed the primary financial arteries of Chloe's touch. The high-definition screen illuminated my face, displaying the millions of dollars currently sitting in their operational accounts, payroll funds, and executive spending lines. Instead of jumping on a live stream to scream over my sister's fake tears, I was executing a flawless legal maneuver. As the majority 80% shareholder, I had the absolute legal authority to halt all financial operations pending a full corporate audit. I moved my cursor over the master control switch. A bright red warning prompt popped up on the screen, asking if I was absolutely certain I wanted to enact a total corporate freeze. I did not even blink. I clicked confirm. I slowly lifted my head from the screen and looked out the window, my eyes fierce and entirely unbothered by the digital circus happening online. Instantly, every single corporate bank account tied to my sister's brand was completely locked down. The routing numbers were frozen. The outbound wire transfer capabilities were disabled. And most importantly, the high-limit corporate credit cards that Brad carried in his expensive leather wallet were immediately rendered completely useless. I leaned back in my leather chair, feeling a profound sense of absolute peace. I was not going to waste a single breath defending my character to strangers. I was simply going to cut off their oxygen supply at the source. Across town in the wealthy business district, Brad was living in a completely different reality. He was sitting in a plush private booth at one of the most exclusive and ridiculously expensive steakhouses in downtown Atlanta. He had gathered 3 of his closest friends and business associates for a lavish lunch to celebrate what he truly believed was his ultimate victory. They were drinking $100 glasses of aged scotch and eating imported Wagyu beef. Brad was in his element, holding court, laughing loudly and bragging to anyone who would listen. He was actively wearing a tailored suit that my firm had paid for. He was drinking liquor that my investments had funded, and he was arrogantly boasting about how he had just secured a massive investment deal from a holding company called Apex Vanguard. He was completely oblivious to the fact that Apex Vanguard was actually me. To new beginnings and getting rid of toxic dead weight, Brad announced, raising his crystal glass high into the air. His friends chuckled and clinked their glasses together, completely buying into his ridiculous facade of being a self-made business mogul. Brad was on top of the world. He felt invincible. He genuinely thought that by yelling at me over the phone and threatening a baseless lawsuit, he had successfully put the quiet black woman back in her place. When the lunch finally concluded, the waiter approached the table carrying a sleek silver tray. The check was massive, totaling well over $2,000. Brad puffed out his chest and confidently tossed his heavy black metal corporate card onto the tray with a smug, arrogant smile. He did not even bother to look at the total. The waiter, a sharply dressed professional with absolutely zero tolerance for arrogance, simply nodded and walked away to the register. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Brad was busy telling a long-winded story about his golf handicap when the waiter finally returned, but he did not have a leather folio or a receipt for Brad to sign. Instead, he placed the heavy black metal card back on the table with a highly professional but entirely icy expression. "I am so sorry, sir, but this card has been declined," the waiter said, his voice carrying just enough volume for the entire table to hear perfectly. The conversation at the table died instantly. Brad's friends stopped laughing and looked down at the black card sitting on the white tablecloth. Brad let out a loud, awkward laugh, waving his hand dismissively at the waiter. "That is absolutely impossible," Brad scoffed, shaking his head. "Run it again. It is a corporate account with no limit. Your machine must be broken." The waiter did not flinch. Or did not. His expression remained totally flat. "I ran it 3 separate times, sir. The banking institution has placed a hard lock on the account. Do you have another form of payment you would like to use?" Brad's face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. The smug arrogance melted off his features, instantly replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. He quickly dug into his leather wallet and pulled out a different platinum card tied directly to Chloe's business expenses. "Here, try this one," he snapped, tossing it onto the tray. The waiter walked away and returned exactly 2 minutes later. "Declined again, sir," he announced. Brad was physically sweating now. A cold panic began to visibly wash over him. His friends were staring at him with a heavy mixture of pity and severe judgment. The illusion of his immense wealth and power was rapidly shattering right in front of their eyes. Desperate to save face, Brad pulled out his personal credit card. He knew it was already completely maxed out from his hidden gambling debts and his secret apartment expenses, but he handed it over anyway, praying for some kind of technological miracle. The waiter returned for the third time, shaking his head slowly. Also declined, sir. If you cannot settle the bill, I will have to call the general manager to the table to discuss payment arrangements. Brad was trapped. He was forced to do the most humiliating thing a man with his massive, fragile ego could ever possibly do. He had to look at the men he had just spent 2 hours bragging to and ask them for money. He sat there in total agonizing silence, while his friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, deeply embarrassed by his complete lack of funds. One by one, the men he had been trying to impress pulled out their own wallets and split his expensive steak and liquor bill. Brad did not say another word for the rest of the afternoon. As soon as he practically ran out of the restaurant, Brad desperately pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking as he opened his mobile banking application. Big, bold red error messages completely covered the screen. Account frozen. Contact your primary administrator. He tried to transfer funds, but the screen locked him out completely. He tried to check the balance, but it displayed a hard 0. He finally realized the terrifying truth. He had absolutely no access to the company money. He could not buy gas for his luxury car. He could not buy a coffee on the way home. He was completely, totally, and utterly broke. The internet could praise his wife all they wanted, but internet likes could not pay a $2,000 steakhouse bill. Back in my penthouse, my phone vibrated quietly on the edge of my desk. It was an automated fraud alert notification directly from the banking server. It detailed 3 attempted high-value transactions at an upscale downtown steakhouse, all successfully blocked by the system administrator. I read the notification detailing the exact amount Brad had tried to spend, and a slow, victorious smile spread across my face. I locked my phone and walked out of my office into the warm living room. The savory smell of roasted turkey and warm spices filled the air. Zuri was happily setting our long dining table with our absolute best gold-rimmed plates. The digital world was still screaming my name, but inside my home there was nothing but perfect peace, warmth, and the quiet, undeniable power of absolute control. Let them complain on the internet. I owned the internet connection. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my dark red wine, looking directly into the camera lens. There is a specific kind of danger that comes from a desperate man. But a desperate, arrogant man who has just been stripped of his unearned power is not dangerous at all. He is simply foolish and remarkably predictable. The rest of the holiday weekend had passed in absolute bliss for Zuri and me. We ate our massive feast, we watched classic movies, and we completely ignored the digital circus happening on social media. My sister Chloe spent her entire weekend posting endless crying videos, trying to rally the internet to her defense. Brad spent his weekend furiously refreshing his banking applications, hoping a miraculous glitch would suddenly restore his access to my money. Neither of their strategies worked. By the time the sun rose on Monday morning, the harsh reality of their complete financial ruin had fully set in. And just as I expected, Brad could not handle the crushing weight of his own powerlessness. My private equity firm occupied the top 3 floors of a premier downtown skyscraper. The executive lobby was a masterpiece of modern corporate architecture. It featured towering floor-to-ceiling glass walls, imported black marble floors, and sleek minimalist furniture. It was a space of extreme wealth, quiet luxury, and absolute professionalism. The men and women who worked for me were brilliant, highly educated financial analysts and portfolio managers. We operated in a world of high-stakes investments where composure and intellect were the ultimate currencies. At exactly 9:15, the heavy glass doors of our primary executive lobby were violently shoved open. Brad stormed into the firm looking absolutely unhinged. The confident, smug aura he had paraded around at the steakhouse was completely gone. His expensive designer suit was severely wrinkled, his silk tie was loosened, and his face was flushed a deep, angry red. He had managed to bypass the ground floor security by aggressively tailing a group of executives into the elevator, but he had no idea what he was actually walking into. He marched straight up to the front reception desk, breathing heavily like a rabid animal. "I need to see Maya right this exact second," he barked violently, slamming his open palm down on the pristine marble counter. Behind the desk sat Mrs. Higgins, our senior receptionist. She was a poised, elegant, older black woman with decades of corporate experience. She did not flinch at his sudden, aggressive outburst. She simply looked up from her computer monitor, adjusted her reading glasses, and met his furious gaze with absolute professional indifference. "Good morning, sir," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice perfectly calm and steady. "Do you have a scheduled appointment with the director today?" "I do not need a damn appointment," Brad yelled, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet lobby. "I am her brother-in-law. You need to call her office and tell her to get down here right now. She has illegally locked my bank accounts, and I am not leaving this building until she fixes it." "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to lower your voice," Mrs. Higgins replied smoothly, reaching her hand under the desk to press the silent security button. "This is a private corporate office. If you do not have an appointment, you will need to leave the premises immediately." Brad completely lost whatever tiny shred of sanity he had left. His deep-seated racial biases and massive ego instantly took total control of his mouth. He looked around the lobby, noticing the diverse, highly professional staff walking past him, and he sneered. "You people always cover for each other." Brad spat, his voice dripping with pure toxic condescension. "Go get her right now. She is stealing my wife's money. She is nothing but a ghetto diversity hire playing dress-up in a fancy building, and I am going to have her fired. You go tell that angry black woman to get her fake executive self down here before I call the police and have this entire fraudulent company shut down." The entire lobby went completely silent. Highly educated investment bankers and corporate lawyers stopped dead in their tracks, turning to stare at the red-faced man screaming racial microaggressions in the middle of our firm. Brad genuinely believed his loud voice and his white privilege would intimidate my staff. He thought acting like a superior force would make these professionals bow to his demands. He was incredibly wrong. From the hallway behind the reception desk, two massive figures emerged in perfectly tailored dark suits. Our corporate security team was not made up of regular mall guards. They were highly trained former military contractors who handled executive protection for billionaires. The lead guard, Marcus, stepped directly in front of Brad, completely blocking his view of the reception desk. Marcus was 6'4" of pure solid muscle with an expression carved from absolute stone. "Sir, you are trespassing," Marcus stated, his deep voice rumbling with quiet authority. "You are going to turn around and walk toward the elevators right now, or I am going to physically remove you from this floor." Brad puffed out his chest, tilting his head back to glare up at the massive security officer. "You cannot touch me, you giant thug!" Brad threatened, stepping aggressively into Marcus's personal space. "I know my rights. I am a corporate executive and I am here to see my—" Brad made the absolute worst mistake of his entire miserable life. He reached out and aggressively shoved Marcus right in the center of his chest. Marcus did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. He moved with terrifying lightning speed. Before Brad could even take a breath, Marcus grabbed him by the lapels of his wrinkled suit, lifted him completely off his feet, and spun him around. With a swift, brutal motion, Marcus drove Brad straight down into the polished marble floor. The heavy, sickening thud of Brad's body hitting the hard stone echoed loudly through the cavernous lobby. All the air was instantly violently knocked out of his lungs. He let out a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze as the second security guard effortlessly pinned his arms behind his back, snapping a pair of heavy-duty zip ties around his wrists. In less than 3 seconds, the arrogant man who had just demanded my firing was entirely immobilized, face down on the floor, completely humiliated in front of my entire staff. Right at that exact moment, The soft, pleasant chime of the private executive elevator cut through the heavy silence in the lobby. The brushed steel doors slid open, and I stepped out. I was wearing a striking crimson-tailored suit with flawless hair and makeup, holding a fresh cup of artisan coffee. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, the sharp rhythmic click of my stilettos echoing against the marble like the ticking of a countdown clock. My staff automatically parted ways to let me through, looking at me with absolute respect. I stopped right at the edge of the security perimeter and looked down at the pathetic red-faced man pinned completely to the floor. Brad was panting heavily, his cheek pressed hard against the cold stone. His expensive suit was completely ruined. His hair was a sweaty mess. He twisted his neck trying to look up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate mixture of pure hatred and sudden paralyzing fear. He finally realized that the quiet woman he had belittled at the Thanksgiving dinner table was an absolute titan in her own world. He realized that his loud voice meant absolutely nothing in a room where I owned the floor he was currently bleeding on. I took a slow, calm sip of my coffee, looking down at him with a perfectly relaxed expression. I did not look angry. I did not look vindictive. I simply looked at him like he was a minor stain on my otherwise immaculate floor. I let a soft, genuinely amused half-smile pull at the corner of my lips. "You just dug your own grave, Brad," I said, my voice smooth, clear, and chillingly calm. "And I am going to make sure you stay buried in it." I left Brad pinned to the cold marble floor of my lobby, waiting for the local police to arrive and formally charge him with trespassing and simple assault. I did not stay to watch them drag him out in handcuffs. I simply turned around, stepped back into my private elevator, and rode it up to my executive suite. My morning coffee was still warm by the time I sat down in my leather chair. The chaotic distraction in the lobby was already completely out of my mind, because sitting right in the center of my heavy mahogany desk was exactly what I had been waiting for. A thick, heavy stack of financial documents rested inside a crisp red folder. My lead corporate auditor knocked softly on my open glass door and stepped into the office. He looked incredibly serious. He did not say a single word as he walked over and tapped the thick red folder with his index finger. He just gave me a solemn nod and quietly left the room, closing the glass door behind him. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood, looking directly down over my own shoulder at the papers. I slowly opened the red cover. The very first page was an executive summary outlining the complete forensic audit of Chloe's Touch over the past 36 months. I ran my manicured finger down the columns of numbers, carefully tracking the flow of capital. I knew Brad was stealing. I knew he was skimming off the top to fund his arrogant lifestyle. But as I flipped through the detailed bank statements and hidden transaction logs, the sheer massive scale of his financial betrayal actually managed to surprise me. Brad was not just skimming a few $1,000s here and there. He was systematically bleeding my sister's company entirely dry. As the acting chief financial officer, Brad had complete unrestricted access to the corporate business accounts. My sister Chloe was so incredibly focused on filming makeup tutorials and maintaining her perfect online aesthetic that she never once looked at a single spreadsheet. She trusted her wealthy, successful white husband to handle all the boring business details. Brad used her blind trust and her complete financial ignorance to construct a massive web of offshore bank accounts and fake vendor invoices. The audit revealed that over the last 3 years, Brad had successfully embezzled nearly $400,000. I flipped to the second section of the report, detailing exactly where all that stolen money was going. Brad was not making secret investments or saving for their future. He was feeding a massive, crippling gambling addiction. Page after page showed large wire transfers to offshore sports betting syndicates and high-stakes online casinos. He was dropping $10,000 on a single football game. He was losing $20,000 in a single weekend playing high-stakes poker in underground digital rooms. The arrogant man who loved to lecture me about financial responsibility was literally burning hundreds of thousands of dollars on completely terrible bets. But the gambling was not even the worst part. The third section of the audit report contained the absolute ultimate weapon: My auditors had flagged a series of recurring monthly payments hidden deep inside the company expense reports. Every single month, for the past 2 years, Brad had been quietly authorizing a wire transfer of $4,500. He categorized the expense under a fake shell company, labeling it as a monthly retainer for digital marketing consulting. But my team was relentless. They tracked the routing numbers directly to an elite luxury apartment complex located in the affluent Buckhead district of Atlanta. Brad was paying the rent for a luxury penthouse apartment all the way across town. I flipped the page and found a printed dossier my security team had pulled together. Attached to the financial records were high-definition photographs taken from the apartment building's security cameras. The photos clearly showed Brad walking into the building late at night, holding hands with a young blonde white woman. She was barely 25 years old, a struggling fitness instructor who clearly enjoyed the lavish lifestyle Brad was secretly funding. Brad was using my sister's hard-earned influencer money to pay for his white mistress. He was sleeping in Chloe's bed, eating the food she paid for, using the cars she leased, and acting like the perfect devoted husband on her social media channels. Meanwhile, he was funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars out the back door to gamble away and play sugar daddy to a woman who looked absolutely nothing like his wife. He was actively exploiting the very same racial dynamics my mother worshipped. My family treated Brad like a god simply because he was a white man who chose to marry a black woman. They thought he was elevating our family. In reality, he was a parasitic con artist using their deep-seated racial insecurities to drain their bank accounts and fund his secret life with a woman of his own race. The profound, absolute irony of the entire situation was almost suffocating. Chloe was currently sitting in her house, sobbing into her phone camera, begging her millions of followers to help save her business from her evil older sister. She genuinely believed that Brad was her knight in shining armor, fighting bravely on the front lines to protect her honor. She had absolutely no idea that the man comforting her on camera was the exact same man who had pushed her business to the absolute brink of total bankruptcy. If I had not frozen the corporate accounts on Friday morning, Brad's massive gambling debts and hidden rent payments would have completely collapsed Chloe's touch within the next 6 months. I was not destroying her company. I was actually the only person keeping it alive. I sat back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the glossy photograph of Brad and his blonde mistress. My heart did not break for Chloe. She had made her bed by choosing to prioritize online aesthetics and skin color over actual character and family loyalty. She had actively participated in my abuse, and she had happily watched her husband disrespect me in my own home. But discovering this dirty little secret completely changed the trajectory of my entire strategy. I did not need to fight her in the court of public opinion. I did not need to release a public statement to defend my reputation against her ridiculous internet smear campaign. I held the absolute destruction of her entire marriage and her entire worldview right in the palm of my hand. I picked up my secure office phone and dialed my lead corporate attorney. He answered on the very first ring. "Good morning, Miss Maya," the lawyer said. "The police report for the lobby incident has been officially filed. Brad is currently sitting in a holding cell downtown. Leave him there for the rest of the day," I instructed, my voice perfectly calm and completely detached. "Let him sit in that concrete cell and panic about his frozen bank accounts. But I need you to draft a new set of legal documents immediately. We are no longer just evicting my mother and freezing the corporate funds. We are moving to full liquidation and a complete hostile takeover." "Understood," the attorney replied. "Do you want me to serve the papers to their legal counsel?" "No," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. "I am going to deliver these documents personally. My mother has been begging me to host a meeting to discuss a peaceful resolution to this entire mess. I think it is finally time we have a proper family dinner. I want you to print the entire audit report, including the photographs, and bind it in a nice, thick folder. Have it delivered to my penthouse by tomorrow evening. Consider it done, Miss Maya." I hung up the phone and looked back down at the stack of damning evidence sitting on my mahogany desk. My family wanted to play dirty games in the dark. They wanted to hide behind fake smiles, internet filters, and deep-rooted prejudice. But I was about to drag every single one of their ugly little secrets directly into the blinding light. The trap was no longer just set. The jaws were wide open, and Brad had just handed me the absolute perfect bait to lure them all straight into the kill zone. I carefully trimmed the bright green stems of fresh white lilies and deep crimson roses, placing them one by one into a heavy crystal vase. The late afternoon sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting a warm golden glow across my massive formal dining table. I smoothed my hands over the crisp white silk table runner and adjusted the gold-rimmed plates. It was Thursday evening, exactly 1 week since my daughter and I had been ruthlessly turned away from my mother's front door. Tonight the roles were entirely reversed. I was hosting a family dinner. The entire event had been orchestrated through a desperately aggressive phone call I received 24 hours earlier. Since I had permanently blocked all of their personal numbers, my mother Brenda was forced to buy a cheap, prepaid burner phone just to reach me. When I heard her voice on the other end of the line, she did not sound apologetic. She did not sound humbled by the fact that she was currently staring down a 30-day eviction notice. She sounded exactly like the demanding, entitled matriarch she had always been. She was simply a matriarch whose kingdom was actively burning to the ground. "Maya, this ridiculous little tantrum of yours has gone on long enough," my mother had snapped through the static of the cheap phone connection. "Brad spent 12 hours sitting in a filthy downtown jail cell yesterday because of your little stunt with the security guards. Chloe had to borrow thousands of dollars from a friend just to bail her own husband out because you illegally froze her company accounts. The bank is calling them about missed corporate payments, and I have real estate agents leaving flyers on my front porch. You are going to invite us over to your apartment tomorrow night for a proper family dinner. You are going to drop these ridiculous lawsuits, unfreeze the accounts, and sign the deed of my house back over to me. We are going to sit down and fix this as a family before you do any permanent damage." Any other daughter might have laughed in her face and immediately hung up the phone. But I knew exactly what my mother was trying to do. She was attempting to use her physical presence to re-establish her dominance. She genuinely believed that if she could just get me into a room with her and Brad, they could gang up on me, yell loudly enough, and bully me back into submission. They thought my corporate power was just a fluke, and that deep down, I was still the quiet, obedient, dark-skinned girl who desperately craved their validation. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I simply let a soft, cold smile spread across my face and replied, "Yes, Mother. You can all come to my penthouse at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. We will put everything on the table and settle this once and for all." She had hung up the phone feeling completely victorious. She thought I was folding under the pressure of her maternal authority. What she did not realize was that I was not offering a peace treaty. I was setting an inescapable trap. I finished arranging the flowers and stepped back to admire the dining room. The table was set for 4 people: me, my mother, my sister Chloe, and my arrogant brother-in-law, Brad. I had specifically arranged for Zuri to spend the entire evening at her favorite indoor amusement park with her beloved nanny. My sweet little girl was going to be eating pizza and playing arcade games, completely shielded from the absolute nuclear fallout that was about to take place in our home. I refused to let my daughter witness the ugly, toxic reality of my family being torn apart. This battlefield was strictly for adults. Right on schedule, the private elevator chimed, and my building concierge stepped out into the foyer, holding a thick, heavy package. It was the special delivery I had requested from my corporate attorney. I thanked the concierge, took the package, and walked back into the dining room. I sliced open the heavy brown envelope and pulled out a sleek black leather-bound folder. It was thick, heavy, and packed with absolute destruction. I opened the cover and briefly reviewed the contents just to ensure everything was perfectly in place. The very first section contained the formal liquidation documents for Chloe's Touch, officially dismantling the company and transferring all remaining assets back to my investment firm. The second section was the complete forensic audit detailing the $400,000 Brad had systematically embezzled over the last 3 years. And tucked neatly in the very back of the folder was the ultimate kill shot. The high-resolution glossy photographs of Brad walking into the luxury Buckhead apartment complex with his young blonde mistress. The bank statements proving he was paying her rent with my sister's money. The undeniable proof that the white savior my family worshipped was actually a parasitic con artist, using their racial insecurities to fund his secret life. I closed the heavy black folder and placed it directly at the head of the dining table right next to my crystal wine glass. It looked like a standard corporate portfolio, but it was actually a ticking time bomb. I walked over to the home bar and poured myself a generous glass of vintage dark red wine. I was wearing a stunning emerald green silk dress that draped perfectly across my figure. My hair was styled in flawless soft waves, and my makeup was sharp and precise. I looked like absolute old money. I looked like a woman who owned the building I was standing in, because I actually did. I took a slow sip of the rich wine, letting the bold flavor settle on my tongue as I looked out over the glittering city skyline. The sun had completely set, and the millions of lights across Atlanta were blinking to life. Down on the busy streets below, regular people were heading home to their families to eat dinner and watch television. But up here in my glass castle, a completely different kind of evening was about to unfold. My mother, Chloe, and Brad were currently riding together in the back of an expensive black car, heading straight toward my building. They were probably rehearsing their angry speeches and planning exactly how they were going to intimidate me into giving them their perfect lives back. They had absolutely no idea that they were walking willingly into a financial and emotional slaughterhouse. They had started this war on Thanksgiving night when they locked my daughter out in the freezing cold over a slice of pie and an internet aesthetic. They thought they could discard us like trash and face absolutely zero consequences. They thought family ties meant I was obligated to quietly absorb their abuse while secretly funding their extravagant lifestyles. Tonight I was going to teach them the most painful and expensive lesson of their entire lives. The sharp piercing buzz of the wall intercom suddenly broke the quiet stillness of the penthouse. I placed my wine glass down on the marble counter and walked slowly over to the control panel. I pressed the silver button, allowing the audio to filter through. Ms. Maya, the front desk concierge, announced, his voice perfectly professional. "You have 3 guests down here in the lobby. A Ms. Brenda, A Ms. Chloe, and a Mr. Brad. They are requesting immediate access to your penthouse. Shall I send them up?" I took a deep breath, feeling the absolute sheer power of the moment coursing through my veins. Every single insult, every single microaggression, every single time they had made me feel less than human, all of it was about to be returned to them with devastating interest. "Yes," I replied, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "Please send them directly up to the private elevator. I have been expecting them." I released the button and walked back into the dining room, taking my seat at the head of the massive table. The heavy black leather folder sat right at my fingertips. I rested my manicured hands on top of the smooth leather and waited for the elevator doors to open. The trap was perfectly set, and the rats were officially in the maze. The brushed steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft, melodic chime. I did not stand up to greet them. I remained perfectly still, seated at the head of the massive dining table, with my hands resting gently on top of the black leather folder. I watched my family step out of the elevator and cross the threshold into my home. My mother, Brenda, walked in first, attempting to hold her head high, but she was clearly nervous. Right behind her came my sister Chloe and her husband Brad. This was the very first time either of them had ever stepped foot inside my penthouse. The camera of my mind captured the exact moment the illusion of their superiority completely shattered. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks the moment she saw the breathtaking living space. Her eyes widened as they darted frantically across the room, taking in the imported marble floors, the original abstract artwork hanging on the walls, and the massive floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city below. Chloe had spent her entire adult life leasing luxury cars, and renting expensive vacation homes just to project an image of extreme wealth for her internet followers. But looking around my home, she instantly realized she was standing inside a level of generational wealth she could not even begin to fake. The intense, raw jealousy radiating from her face was absolutely palpable. She looked at my flawless emerald green silk dress and then looked down at her own designer clothes, suddenly realizing how incredibly small she actually was. Brad looked even worse. He had clearly just been released from the downtown holding cell. His hair was completely unkempt, his face was puffy, and his usually sharp suit was severely wrinkled and smelled faintly of cheap institutional soap. But the physical toll of his brief incarceration was nothing compared to the massive blow his fragile ego was currently taking. He stared at the sparkling crystal chandelier above the dining table and swallowed hard. This was the same man who had confidently called me a diversity hire just 24 hours earlier. He had built his entire identity around being the wealthy white savior of our black family. Standing in my multi-million-dollar fortress, he suddenly realized he was nothing but an arrogant, financially illiterate guest in a kingdom he could never possibly afford. "Please come in and take a seat," I said, my voice echoing smoothly across the quiet room. They slowly walked toward the dining table, moving with the cautious hesitation of prey entering a lion's den. My mother sat to my immediate right. Chloe sat to my left, refusing to make direct eye contact with me. Brad stubbornly took the seat at the far opposite end of the long table, trying desperately to put as much physical distance between us as possible. The air in the room was incredibly thick and suffocating. There were no warm greetings. There were no apologies for locking my disabled daughter out in the freezing cold on Thanksgiving night. There was only the heavy, toxic tension of people who had finally been backed into a corner. I did not offer them anything to drink. I simply picked up my own crystal glass and took a slow sip of the dark red wine, waiting for them to make the first move. I did not have to wait very long. Brad could never stand the silence. His massive ego simply could not tolerate the fact that a black woman was currently holding absolute power over his life. Despite his wrinkled suit and his frozen bank accounts, he immediately fell right back into his usual entitled condescending tone. He reached his trembling hand inside his suit jacket and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. He aggressively tossed it onto the table and slid it across the pristine white silk runner until it stopped right in front of my plate. "We are not here to play your twisted little corporate games," Maya Brad snapped, leaning forward and attempting to glare at me with authority. "I had my lawyers draft that document this afternoon. It is a full relinquishment of your shares in Chloe's Touch and an immediate authorization to unfreeze all corporate assets. You are going to sign that paper right now so we can put an end to this ridiculous nightmare you started." I looked down at the cheap piece of printer paper sitting next to my crystal wine glass. I did not even bother to pick it up. I just let out a soft, genuinely amused chuckle. "Are you seriously issuing demands, Brad?" I asked, my tone light and completely unbothered. "You were literally pinned to the floor of my lobby yesterday afternoon. You are currently facing criminal trespassing charges. Your credit cards are declining at steakhouses and your wife is begging for pennies on the internet. And you walked into my home to hand me a piece of paper. I am giving you a chance to do the right thing." Brad interrupted, his voice rising in volume as he desperately tried to regain control of the room. "You took advantage of my wife. You used some shady legal loophole to steal 80% of her business. If you sign that paper tonight, we will agree not to press federal charges against you for corporate fraud. We are offering you a clean exit, Maya. Take the deal and give my wife her company back before I destroy your career." The sheer delusion required to make that statement was absolutely breathtaking. He was broke, desperate, and legally cornered, but he still believed his white privilege was a magic wand that could simply wave my legal ownership away. Before I could even respond, my mother decided it was time to chime in. She leaned across the table, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. She was completely enabling his delusional behavior, just like she had done since the day he married into our family. "Listen to him, Maya." My mother pleaded, her voice dripping with toxic guilt. Brad is offering you a very generous way out of this mess. You have already proven your point. We see that you have a nice apartment and a good job. You clearly have plenty of money. You do not need to take Chloe's little makeup company away from her. It is her absolute dream. I slowly turned my head to look at my mother. Are you actually sitting at my table defending the man who tried to extort me? I asked softly. He is family, Maya, she fired back, slamming her hand down on the table. And family protects each other. You have been holding this secret over our heads for years. You bought my house, and you funded her business just so you could hold us hostage whenever you felt like it. That is sick. You need to be the bigger person tonight. It is your duty to this family to sign that paper, give us our property back, and apologize for the public humiliation you caused. If you just sign the paper, we can go back to being a normal, happy family. Chloe finally found her voice. She looked up at me, her eyes narrowed with pure, bitter resentment. Just sign it, Maya, she muttered, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. You have ruined my brand deals. You have terrified my followers. You have made your point. Just give me my life back so I never have to look at you ever again. I looked at the three of them sitting around my beautiful dining table. They were not sorry. They did not feel an ounce of remorse for how they had treated Zuri and me. They were only angry that they had finally been caught and held accountable. They genuinely believed that because I had always been the quiet, obedient sister, I would eventually fold under their combined pressure. They thought they could walk into my penthouse, demand my assets, and walk out completely victorious. I slowly reached out and placed my manicured fingers on top of the cheap piece of paper Brad had slid across the table. I did not look at the words typed on the page. I simply looked directly into Brad's arrogant, desperate eyes. You want me to sign away my rights to keep the peace? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. You want to go back to being a happy, normal family. Exactly, Brad said, nodding his head and sitting back in his chair with a smug, triumphant smile, believing he had finally broken me. Just sign it and we walk away. I picked up the piece of paper and calmly tore it directly down the middle. I stacked the two torn halves together and tore them again. I let the shredded pieces of his pathetic demand flutter down onto the pristine white table runner like cheap confetti. Brad's smug smile vanished instantly. Chloe gasped. My mother's jaw dropped completely open. We are entirely done keeping the peace, I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I did not invite you here tonight to sign your pathetic little papers. I invited you here to show you exactly what happens when you decide to declare war on the person who built your entire world. I moved my hands away from the shredded paper and slowly placed them on top of the heavy, black leather folder sitting at the head of the table. The room went dead silent. The trap had officially snapped shut, and it was finally time to show them exactly what I had caught inside. The heavy silence in the dining room was so absolute you could hear the faint hum of the city traffic hundreds of feet below us. I kept my eyes locked on Brad as I slowly flipped open the heavy black leather cover of the folder. I reached inside and pulled out the first thick stack of crisp legal documents. Without breaking eye contact, I slid the papers smoothly across the pristine white table runner until they bumped gently against my sister's water glass. Chloe stared down at the documents as if I had just slid a live, venomous snake across the table. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she hesitated to touch the paper. Those are the formal corporate liquidation and asset seizure documents for Chloe's touch. I explained, my voice perfectly steady and clear. As the 80% majority shareholder, I have officially initiated the complete dissolution of your company. The brand is dead, Chloe. The bank accounts are frozen, the vendor contracts are permanently terminated, and every single piece of intellectual property, including your social media handles, now belongs entirely to my investment firm. You do not own a makeup company anymore. You are officially unemployed. Brad violently slammed his open palm down on the table, rattling the crystal glasses. He was sweating profusely and his face was a mask of desperate, furious denial. You are completely bluffing, Maya, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You do not own 80% of anything. You are just trying to scare us with fake paperwork. And even if you did, it does not matter anymore. I already told you we secured a massive capital injection. Apex Vanguard sent us a letter of intent this morning. They are a multi-billion-dollar holding company, and they are buying you out by the end of the week. You are completely finished. We do not need you or your pathetic corporate games. I leaned forward slowly, resting my elbows on the edge of the mahogany table and lacing my fingers together. I let a perfectly calm, chilling smile spread across my face as I looked directly into his desperate, bloodshot eyes. "Ah, yes," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, magnetic whisper. "Apex Vanguard, the mysterious billionaire savior coming to rescue the beautiful damsel in distress from her wicked older sister." You were so incredibly proud of that email, Brad. You bragged about it at the steakhouse while you were trying to pay for lunch with my frozen credit cards. Brad physically flinched at the mention of the steakhouse. His eyes darted nervously toward Chloe, who was now looking at him with deep confusion. "Tell me, Brad," I continued, never letting him break my gaze. "When you received that automated letter of intent, did you ever bother to look up the corporate registration for Apex Vanguard? Did you look at the board of directors? Did you trace the LLC back to its parent company? Because if you had actually done your job as the chief financial officer, you would have noticed a very familiar name sitting at the very top of the executive board." I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating truth hang in the air for just a fraction of a second. "Apex Vanguard is a subsidiary shell company under my primary equity firm," I announced. "I am the sole managing director. I am the anonymous investor you have been bragging about. You have been threatening me with my own money, Brad. There is no white knight coming to save you. There is only me." The color completely drained from Brad's face, leaving him a pale, sickly shade of gray. His jaw literally dropped open, and he sank back into his chair, as if he had just been physically punched in the stomach. All of his arrogant white privilege, all of his loud, demanding authority instantly evaporated into thin air. He was completely defeated. Beside him, Chloe finally snatched the documents off the table. She flipped frantically through the pages, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. She saw the state seals. She saw the certified corporate registration numbers. And right there in bold black ink, she saw my name listed as the ultimate majority shareholder of her entire life. "No," Chloe whispered, her voice shaking violently. "This cannot be real. This is impossible. I built this company myself. I am a self-made businesswoman. I worked for this." "You built absolutely nothing, Chloe," I corrected her, my tone sharp and completely unforgiving. "You bought expensive ring lights and filmed makeup tutorials in your bedroom. You leased luxury cars and pretended you were rich on the internet. But I paid for those cars. I paid for the inventory. I paid for the massive marketing campaigns that bought you your precious 1 million followers. You are not a self-made boss. You never were. You are an expensive dependent living entirely on a corporate allowance that I provided because nobody else in the real business world would ever take you seriously." Tears immediately flooded Chloe's eyes, completely ruining her flawless makeup. The psychological devastation playing out across her face was absolute. Her entire identity was shattered. She had spent her entire adult life believing she was vastly superior to me. She thought she was the beautiful, successful golden child, and I was just the boring, dark-skinned sister who sat alone in a cubicle. Realizing that the sister she had mocked and tormented for decades was actually the invisible billionaire signing her paychecks was a humiliation so profound it left her completely speechless. She dropped the papers onto the table and buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. My mother looked completely horrified. She looked at Chloe crying and then looked over at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Maya, please," my mother begged, her voice cracking with raw desperation. "You cannot do this to your own sister. She is a mother. Her fans look up to her. This brand is her entire identity. If you take this away from her, she will have absolutely nothing. You are destroying her life." "Her fans look up to a carefully curated fiction, Mom," I fired back, refusing to show an ounce of pity. "A fiction that I completely financed, just so you could walk around your country club bragging about your perfect, light-skinned daughter. You both spent years treating me like I was invisible. You told me I was not good enough to sit at your Thanksgiving table. Well, tonight I'm repossessing the table, the chairs, and the entire house you live in. Brad suddenly slammed his fist against his leg, trying desperately to salvage whatever tiny shred of masculine pride he had left. He glared at me, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "This is highly illegal," Brad stammered, pointing his finger at me again. "You cannot just set up anonymous shell companies and trap us like this. It is a massive conflict of interest. I am the chief financial officer of Chloe's Touch, and I know the law. I will take this directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I will have you investigated for corporate fraud, and I will personally see to it that you lose your corporate license. You are going to prison, Maya." I looked at Brad and let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed brightly off the high ceilings of my dining room. It was the laugh of a woman who had absolutely nothing to fear. "I was really hoping you would bring up your role as the chief financial officer, Brad," I said, smiling warmly at him. "Because while my corporate auditors were busy freezing your company accounts over the weekend, they decided to take a very close look at your bookkeeping. And they found some incredibly fascinating transactions." I reached my hand back over to the heavy black leather folder sitting in front of me. I let my fingers rest gently on the second stack of papers hidden inside. Brad's threats instantly died in his throat. His eyes widened in absolute terror as he watched my hand. He knew exactly what he had been hiding, and he suddenly realized that I knew it too. I pulled the thick secondary file from the back pocket of the leather binding. Brad raised both of his hands, palms facing outward, as if he could physically stop the truth from hitting him. His chest heaved, and a bead of cold sweat rolled down his pale forehead. "Please, Maya," he whispered, his voice cracking with raw, genuine terror. "Do not do this. We can talk about this privately, please." I did not hesitate. I flicked my wrist and tossed the heavy stack of documents directly across the long dining table. The thick pile of papers hit Brad squarely in the chest and exploded outward. Glossy photographs, financial ledgers, bank statements, and printed wire transfer receipts rained down across the pristine white silk table runner, scattering wildly among the crystal wine glasses and gold-rimmed plates. Brad scrambled frantically, desperately grabbing at the papers like a drowning man trying to catch water. He tried to shove the glossy photos under his plate and sweep the bank statements onto the floor, but there were simply too many of them. The damage was already done. Chloe looked down at the mess scattered across the table. Her eyes instantly locked onto a high-resolution 8 by 10 photograph resting right next to her water glass. She slowly reached out her hand, trembling violently, and picked up the picture. It was a perfectly clear shot of Brad holding hands with his young blonde fitness instructor, walking into the lobby of the luxury Buckhead apartment building. Chloe stared at the image, her mouth opening and closing silently. She dropped the photo and picked up the paper resting right underneath it. It was a highlighted bank statement from her own company showing a recurring monthly wire transfer of $4,500 paying for the apartment rent. Chloe began grabbing paper after paper. She saw the gambling receipts. She saw the massive offshore wire transfers. She saw the bold red numbers at the bottom of the audit summary detailing the $400,000 that Brad had systematically stolen from her business over the last 3 years. Her perfectly constructed illusion of a flawless life completely shattered into a million sharp, jagged pieces. "What is this?" Chloe breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Brad, what is this? Who is this woman?" Brad was hyperventilating. He looked at the photographs and then looked at his wife, his face contorted in absolute panic. "Baby, listen to me," he stammered, reaching his hand out toward her. "It is a setup. Maya faked those documents. She hired someone to Photoshop those pictures. She is just trying to tear our marriage apart because she is jealous. You know how she is, baby. You know she wants to ruin us." He was actively trying to gaslight her, using the exact same toxic rhetoric they had weaponized against me for decades. But this time, the undeniable physical proof was staring Chloe right in the face. She looked at the date stamps on the photographs. She looked at the routing numbers on the bank statements, realizing they matched her corporate accounts perfectly. "You stole from me," Chloe said, her voice suddenly dropping into a low, guttural growl that I had never heard from her before. "You took my money. You took the money my sister gave me and you used it to buy a luxury apartment for some cheap blonde girl across town." Brad shook his head frantically, tears of sheer panic welling in his eyes. "No, Chloe. I swear on my life it is not what it looks like. I was making investments. I was trying to grow our portfolio. She is just a real estate consultant." "A consultant," Chloe screamed, the sound tearing through the quiet penthouse like a physical weapon. "You were paying her rent. You were holding her hand. You stole $400,000 from my company to gamble and sleep with another woman while I was on the internet defending you. You made me look like an absolute fool." I shifted my gaze to my mother. Brenda was sitting frozen in her chair, her face entirely drained of blood. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her entire worldview was violently collapsing right in front of her eyes. She had spent her whole life worshipping whiteness, viewing Brad as the ultimate prize and the savior of our family. She had repeatedly thrown me, her own loyal, hardworking daughter, completely under the bus, just to protect this man. She had allowed him to disrespect me in my own house. She had allowed him to turn my disabled daughter away in the cold. And she had done it all for a parasitic con artist who was actively stealing their money to fund a secret life with a white woman. The staggering weight of her own foolishness and deep-seated racial prejudice finally crashed down onto her shoulders. She covered her mouth with trembling hands, completely unable to speak. Chloe completely snapped. The polished, pristine influencer persona vanished instantly, replaced by a woman consumed by blinding primal rage. She picked up her crystal wine glass and hurled it directly at Brad's head. The glass shattered against the high-backed wooden dining chair, sending dark red wine splashing across Brad's face and his wrinkled suit. Brad let out a pathetic yelp, throwing his arms up to protect his face. "You disgusting piece of trash!" Chloe shrieked. Before anyone could even blink, Chloe vaulted directly across the massive mahogany table. She did not care about her designer clothes or the expensive table settings. She lunged forward, crashing into the flower vase and sending white lilies and crimson roses spilling across the wood. She grabbed Brad by the lapels of his suit and began wildly beating her fists against his chest and shoulders. Brad screamed, completely terrified, trying to push her away without striking her back. "Chloe, get off me!" he yelled. "You are acting crazy! Calm down! Do not tell me to calm down!" Chloe roared, her manicured nails digging fiercely into his neck. "I gave you everything. I built this life for us, and you bled me dry. I am going to kill you. I am going to absolutely destroy you." My mother finally snapped out of her paralyzed shock. She jumped up from her chair, screaming hysterically. "Chloe, stop it," she cried, reaching across the table, trying desperately to pull her daughter off the cowering man. "You are going to hurt yourself. Stop it right now." The dining room descended into absolute pure animalistic chaos. The sound of shattering crystals, screaming women, and Brad's pathetic whimpering filled the elegant space. They were tearing each other apart completely, destroying the fake glamorous family image they had spent decades meticulously curating. I did not yell. I did not flinch. I did not try to break up the fight. I simply stood up from the head of the table, completely detached from the violent circus happening in my dining room. I smoothed the wrinkles from my emerald green silk dress, picked up my wine glass, and took a final leisurely sip. I watched them destroy each other with a profound sense of absolute closure. The poison was finally out of my life. I walked calmly over to the wall intercom and pressed the silver button. "Yes, Ms. Maya," the ground floor concierge answered immediately over the speaker. "Marcus," I said, addressing the head of my private security team who I knew was standing by. "The trash in my dining room has officially started to rot. Please come up here and escort it out of my building." "Understood, Ms. Maya," Marcus replied, his deep voice completely professional. "We are on our way up." I released the button and walked back over to the dining table. Chloe had successfully pinned Brad against the far wall and was slapping him repeatedly across the face, while my mother sobbed uncontrollably, pulling at Chloe's arms. "Enough," I commanded, my voice slicing through the screaming like a sharp, icy blade. They all froze, turning to look at me, panting heavily. Brad's face was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, and his suit was covered in dark red wine. Chloe's hair was a wild, tangled mess, and her flawless makeup was completely ruined by streaks of black mascara and angry tears. "You are all leaving my home right now," I told them, pointing directly toward the private elevator. "The corporate takeover is finalized. The eviction notice stands. And Brad, the police already have a copy of the audit report. I strongly suggest you find a very good defense attorney because corporate embezzlement is a federal crime." The private elevator chimed loudly behind them. The polished steel doors slid open, and Marcus stepped out, flanked by three massive security guards in dark suits. They immediately marched into the dining room, grabbing Brad by his arms and pulling him roughly away from the wall. They flanked Chloe and my mother, leaving them absolutely no room to argue or resist. "You do not ever have to worry about making room for me at your table again," I said, looking directly into my mother's terrified, tear-filled eyes. "Because you are never getting a seat at mine. Get out of my house." The security guards forcefully marched the three of them toward the elevator. Brad was openly weeping, begging Chloe to listen to him. Chloe was screaming insults at him, ignoring me entirely. My mother simply hung her head, sobbing in absolute devastating defeat. The steel doors slid shut, cutting off their voices instantly, and leaving my penthouse in perfect, beautiful silence. 6 months have passed since those heavy steel elevator doors closed on my family. The profound, beautiful silence that filled my penthouse that night has never once been broken. I sit here now on my curved white sofa, letting the warm spring sunlight wash over my face. Behind me, I can hear the joyful sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. My beautiful daughter Zuri is rolling around on the imported rug, happily laughing as she wrestles with our brand new golden retriever puppy. Her tiny pink hearing aid is catching the sunlight, completely visible and completely perfect. She never has to shrink herself to fit into someone else's fake aesthetic ever again. The fallout from that brutal dinner was swift and entirely merciless. I kept my promise and handed the complete forensic audit directly to the authorities. Brad was officially indicted on multiple federal charges, including corporate embezzlement, wire fraud, and severe tax evasion. His wealthy white savior facade completely crumbled when his hidden offshore accounts and massive gambling debts were exposed to the public. He is currently sitting in a federal holding facility awaiting a trial that will likely put him behind bars for the next decade. His arrogant voice has been permanently silenced by the cold reality of a concrete cell. His former business associates want absolutely nothing to do with him, and his young blonde mistress vanished the exact second his stolen money stopped flowing. Chloe is currently navigating the incredibly bitter reality of a messy, highly publicized divorce. When I officially liquidated Chloe's touch, her entire influencer empire instantly evaporated. The luxury cars were repossessed by the bank. The expensive filming equipment was seized. Her millions of followers quickly moved on to the next trendy internet aesthetic, abandoning her comment sections entirely. Without my invisible financial backing, she was completely exposed to the harsh realities of the actual working world. Today, the former self-proclaimed millionaire boss babe works a basic retail commission job at a mid-tier mall makeup counter. She spends her days standing on her aching feet, applying foundation to strangers, and forced to smile politely at the everyday people she used to arrogantly look down upon. Her reality is no longer filtered, and there is absolutely no one left to sponsor her lifestyle. As for my mother Brenda, she learned the hard way that my 30-day eviction notice was absolute. When she stubbornly refused to pack her belongings, my legal team followed standard procedure and had the local sheriff arrive at the red brick house to formally remove her from the premises. The wealthy neighbors she had spent decades trying to desperately impress stood on their perfectly manicured lawns and watched as her designer luggage was placed unceremoniously on the curb. She now lives in a cramped, outdated one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. There are no crystal chandeliers, no expensive catered parties, and no grand dining tables. She sits alone in a tiny living room with no golden child left to fund her delusions of grandeur, and no scapegoat left to blame for her own massive failures. She tried reaching out to me a few times, leaving desperate crying voicemails from various burner phones, but my security team intercepts every single one. I owe her absolutely nothing. They all made their choices. They chose to value skin color over actual character. They chose fake internet clout over genuine family loyalty. They chose to protect a parasitic con artist over the brilliant, quiet daughter who was silently paying for the very roof over their heads. I did not maliciously destroy their lives. I simply removed the invisible financial safety net I had been holding under them and allowed the natural gravity of their terrible decisions to do the rest. The toxic cycle of generational abuse stops permanently with me. I have built an incredible empire, and I am finally completely free to share it only with those who truly deserve my love. I look dead into the camera lens, taking a slow, deep breath of absolute peace. Sometimes the only way to teach people gratitude is to let them taste what it is like to lose everything. This Thanksgiving, our table is huge, and there is absolutely no room for toxicity. I let a slow, satisfied smirk pull at the corner of my mouth as the screen finally fades to black.